Good morning, everybody. My name is Erin. I work here at ELCCT, and I'm glad you're joining us today. If you're like me, every morning when you come out, take a nice deep breath of fresh air, and I like to listen for the birds that are a lot more active at this time of year. I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but if you go outside and just stand there and listen, you'll hear all sorts of birds singing, flitting around, and doing things that they do during the springtime. The other day, actually it was last week, maybe Wednesday or Thursday, we were walking by the window here and happened to notice a little mama house finch sitting on a nest right outside the window here in this arborvitae bush. And I think she's actually on the nest now, but we're going to kind of pan in there and see if we can see her sitting on there. And if she's not, she might fly in because we're right by the window. It might be a little nerve-wracking for her. But believe it or not, we do have some bird species from Connecticut that are on the nest and incubating eggs, soon to be hatching and fledging from the nest. There are some species of birds that do nest earlier. Our hawks, our owls, already have young nestlings, but our songbirds are just starting to get going. And one of the earliest nesters in Connecticut is the house finch. So here is a picture of a male house finch. You can see that he is kind of a small-bodied finch, and he's got a pretty large beak, that quintessential finch-like beak, kind of conical and very thick, good for eating seeds. He's got a kind of somewhat flat head, wings are kind of short, and it makes his tail seem really long by comparison. House finches are gregarious birds, and they collect at feeders and perch in nearby trees, kind of up high. And when they're not at the feeders, they can be seen on the ground, on weed stalks, or in the trees. They are there are a lot of house finches, let's just put it that way. And they're fairly widespread. They do well in areas where there are people. So you can see them in city parks. You can see them in your backyard, in urban centers even, around farms and forest edges, from the East Coast to the West Coast. Okay? And believe it or not, the house finch was actually not originally a bird of the East Coast. These birds are originally from the western United States and Mexico. And back in the 1940s, a small number of these guys were turned loose on Long Island in New York after failed attempts to sell them as caged birds, as pet birds. So they're also known as Hollywood finches. But now they are very well adapted to living here and all across the United States. So Mama Finch is a little less colorful than Daddy Finch. The adult females aren't red. They're kind of plain, grayish brown. They have a thick, blurry streaks and kind of an indistinctly marked face. What's kind of cool about house finches is unlike most other passerines or perching birds or neotropical migratory songbirds that come here to grow their young, nest here and grow their young, these guys eat they eat exclusively plant foods. It's a very rare occurrence in the bird world for these birds to be eating essentially a vegetarian diet. Most of these birds, to keep up with the fast-growing babies, they need to feed them protein. But these guys are going to be feeding them, their nestlings, plant foods, particularly this time of year once they hatch, dandelions. The nest is built by the female, and during courtship, if you've ever witnessed these guys, the males will actually touch beaks with the females. It's really cute. And he'll present her with little bits of foods, and she'll actually mimic the behavior of a young bird, a fledgling bird, kind of shaking her wings. They are, like I said, an early nester, so we might get 2 or more broods a year from these guys, with 2 to 6 eggs per brood, and more commonly 4 or 5 eggs in the nest. And the egg laying takes place in the morning at a rate of 1 egg per day. So yesterday, I went out when Mom wasn't on the nest, and I took a picture to see what she's got going on in there. And this is a picture of her nest. Very well built nest. You can see all sorts of little twigs. It looks like she's got some birch bark interspersed in that nest as well. Very well constructed nest. And how many eggs do you guys see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eggs. This is the maximum number of eggs that you're going to see in a house finch nest. Here's a little clearer picture of her eggs. And you can see they're kind of a pale bluish green. Few black spots. They're smooth, kind of somewhat glossy surface. The female, mama finch, is the one that incubates the eggs. And so we noticed this nest and mom incubating the eggs around last Wednesday or Thursday. So potentially we could have babies around Earth Day, April 22nd, because their incubation rate is about 2 weeks. Shortly after that, they'll hatch and mom will remove those eggshells from the nest. So this is not my picture. This is something I grabbed off the internet, but I just wanted to give you a heads up because we'll check in on Earth Day or shortly after to see what's going on if all those eggs have hatched. When those babies hatch, they are completely helpless. They're called altricial birds. Most songbirds are altricial, and that has to do with how they hatch out of the egg and what their state is. When they hatch out of the egg, their eyes are closed. They have just a little bit of fluffy gray, white gray down. They're completely helpless. And the female feeds the young, and the male usually will join in eventually. And what's neat is the young are silent. They're not going to make any little cute peeping noises for the first 7 to 8 days, but then they're going to start making some noise after that. Mom and dad are going to be feeding them very frequently. Anybody know how often these guys need to eat? When they're a little hatchling, every 15 minutes or more. So they are hungry, hungry little guys because they go from hatching to fledging very quickly. Okay? The earliest these birds will leave the nest would be about May 4th, because once they hatch, it's about another 2 weeks or so for them to fledge. Latest would be around May 11th. So we'll check in and see these guys too and see their progress. But before flying, the young often climb onto the adjacent plants. So in our case, it'll be on the branches of that bush. Like I said, their preferred seeds at this time of year to their young are dandelion seeds. Most birds, even the herbivorous ones, learning as adults, tend to feed their nestlings animal matter in order to give them protein necessary to grow. But the house finches, again, are one of those few birds that feed plant matter only to their young. I did want to show you something because last year we did have some more house finches nesting in the arborvitae, just a different one outside of the center. Now this nest looks a little different. There's 4 house finch eggs, but then there's one oddball in there. Anybody know what that could possibly be? That oddball egg is not a house finch egg. That is actually from a cowbird, a brown-headed cowbird. It does happen. Cowbirds are called brood parasites or nest parasites. They do not build their own nest. They do not take care of their own young. It is now whatever species they chose to lay that egg, that parent, those birds are going to raise that cowbird egg and nestling. Another thing I just wanted to touch on since we're talking about house finches, here's another picture, and you can see if you look at this guy here, that male house finch, if you look at his eye, he looks a little funny. This is obviously a picture from the winter time. He's on a feeder. We probably shouldn't have our feeders out this time of year. But in the winter time, when all these guys are congregating on the feeders, you might notice a house finch or maybe a goldfinch or a purple finch that has some crustiness on their eyes. That is actually a bacterial disease that is very easily spread between house finches, goldfinches, and more rarely purple finches in grosbeaks. It's called a Mycoplasma, okay? And we call that house finch conjunctivitis. It is something that is treatable, so if you do see a bird that has those crusty eyes, they're going to have a hard time obviously seeing, and therefore having a hard time eating and getting around. So they're not going to be doing well. You can catch those birds up and bring them to a licensed wildlife rehabilitator for care, and they should be able to treat that disease. But it is very transferable between bird species, but not to you. It's not a zoonotic disease, okay? In order to prevent that from happening, what you can do is be diligent on cleaning your bird feeders. So once a month at least, take everything apart, especially if it's a tube feeder, they're easier to take apart. Clean everything out, soak it in dilute bleach solution, rinse it really well, let it dry, and then you can fill it back up again. All right, so that's a little bit about the house finches. We do have some other birds in our area that are nesting at this time of year in early April. One of those birds that you might see starting to get going is actually our state bird, and also on our logo here, the American robin. So the American robin have some stuff here from the Barnes Nature Center for you guys to kind of check out, which is neat. You can check out this nest of the American robin. It's got some really old eggs in there, but you can see the construction of this nest made of mud. She puts that mud all together, and then she'll incorporate all of these little sticks and twigs. There are natural and man-made materials in this nest. Little bits of plastic woven in there. Sometimes you'll see horsehair or wool. There's a piece of string that she found. Very neat construction of the nest. And of course those quintessential baby blue robin's eggs. Does everybody know what the robin sounds like? I think we all should. Here's a little Audubon bird that we have at the Barnes Nature Center in our nest display. So you can match up the little bird with the nest. So that's the sound, the happy sound of our robins. And they are usually this time of year very, very happy, especially on a nice sunny day like that, and you can hear them calling. Another nest that I wanted to show you just because it was an example that we had at the Barnes Nature Center, but these birds have not yet arrived back into Connecticut, but soon. And this is actually the nest of a Baltimore Oriole. Here is a mount of the Baltimore Oriole. It's a very old one, so not quite as bright, brilliant orange as they would be in the wild. But this bird makes a very neat nest, almost like a pendant kind of hanging nest. And they'll make these nests very, very high up in the trees. We usually have them nesting near our apple orchard every year. And you can kind of see, again, there's both natural and man-made materials in here. It looks like some sisal rope here. And there's 3 layers, an outer layer, a woven layer, and then the inner layer where the babies would sit and the eggs would be laid. And the inner layer, it's a little bit more soft, finer material in there. I have another example of one that's a little bit older. Oftentimes we get our hands on these types of nests because it's obviously the end of the nesting season and they're starting to deteriorate and the wind blows them down out of the trees. But this one's kind of neat because you can see the construction. I see horsehair in there. I see more sisal. I see some kind of man-made string, sticks. And on the inside, this one has, looks like some leaves for her soft layer on the inside. Does anybody know what the sound of the Baltimore Oriole is? Well, you're gonna learn. It's a very nice sound as well. Very cool. So some other nesting birds at this time of year, we had checked in earlier on our mourning dove. I checked on her yesterday, the mourning dove that's in our orchard right now. She was sitting on the nest. I couldn't tell if she had babies yet. I would think they have probably hatched or just about to hatch. So we'll do a check-in on Mama Mourning Dove out in the orchard. Some other birds that are going to be nesting. We have bluebirds that should be starting to build their nests in the box that they have selected earlier in the year. And also chickadees. Your eastern phoebes are also out making their nests. If you have any porch overhangs or even a light on the outside of your house, oftentimes those are good places for the phoebes to start building their nests. And even in our little nest box that's not really suitable for a lot of birds, we do have chickadees going in and out. And we have is that the boy? I can't tell from here. One of our house finches is on top of the arborvitae, waiting for us to leave the window so they can get back to incubating their eggs. All right, everybody, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Hope you learned a little bit about the house finch and some of the other nesting birds, the early nesters in Connecticut.
Okay. So hi everyone, good morning, it's Lauren Pryor. So one activity that's really great, if you enjoyed this video, is watching birds, so birding. And birding you can do from the comfort of your own home. So you can do it right outside the window, kind of like we are right now. You can go onto your back porch or out into your backyard. And you don't need fancy binoculars to do birding. Usually you just might need a chair and you can sit really still. But this time of year, early spring, is great for birding for a variety of reasons. Because when we look outside, there's not a lot of foliage on the trees yet. So being able to physically see the birds is a lot easier. You can see the birds, you can see movement, where they are. You might be able to see past nests that they've made or areas that they're returning to. A lot less foliage also means that you can hear the birds calling to each other, so that you're not going to have that muffled sound. And since we still are in early spring, it's a great time for birding because as more and more birds migrate up, you're going to get overwhelmed. So early spring, not a lot of birds have made it back yet, so you're not going to be overwhelmed with what bird am I seeing, what bird am I hearing. You're going to just have a few examples of the species, like Erin mentioned before. Well, awesome. So that's a little bit about our birds that we're starting to see here on the In-Rock Nature Preserve. Thanks for tuning in this morning, and we hope you tune in tomorrow too. We'll be back at 10 a.m.